there, folks. My name is Emily.
And I'm Elle.
And we are Oh My Word, a podcast where we discuss movies, musicals, books, TV shows, etc., and give you an idea of the content, meaning what is the story about? What kind of themes are there? Is it appropriate? So that you have an idea of what you are getting yourself into.
Exactly. And then you can say, also, how many pearls should I clutch or be ready to clutch before I embark upon this story journey?
Or should I have my pearls close by to clutch as I embark upon this journey?
Exactly. But if you really want to follow our pearl clutching scale and be very careful about what kind of what's going to happen to your pearls, then you'll follow our scale. That's 0 to 4 for violence, language, and romance. About 0 being the best, that means no pearls were clutched, and 4 means all the pearls were clutched.
And your necklace is ruined.
Yeah, we have no more room in our hand anymore to be clutching any more pearls because we're so distraught.
To be clear, so language, that one should be pretty clear. If there's a lot of profanity, that's where language comes from. Violence is physical violence, but can also include things like bullying and specific violent acts or like abuse. Mental or emotional abuse, sometimes we'll talk about also in a discussion of violence. Then romance doesn't have to do just with the fact of is there not a relationship in the story, but is there nudity? Are people making out? Are they engaging in things like, are they married or are they not married? Are they kids? Are they grown-ups? Are they same-sex couples? So it encompasses all of those things. And again, the higher the score, the more the stuff that's in it.
Because it could technically be a romance or like a chick flick and score 0 on romance if it's a very clean one. Somehow.
Right.
By some magical miracle somehow.
Or like a 0.5 where it's like the story's about a romance. Well, if you think of like a fairy tale type thing, like a Cinderella or something, where there's romance, and a lot of the story is about romance, but they're not making out in dark alleys. They're not taking each other's clothes off, right? They're just happen to be in a relationship, which that's life. It happens.
And that's how life goes. Sometimes things happen and sometimes you try to make things happen. For example, if you were discussing a Netflix adaptation of a book called Dash and Lily's Book of Dares by David, was it Levithan?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
We don't know how to pronounce things sometimes. And Rachel Cohn, it's just called Dash and Lily on Netflix. So we're not talking about the books, we're talking about the adaptation. It's kind of like a mini-series. And it's all about how Lily is going to be finding like this perfect... She lives in New York, and New York is such a magical place. Which, side note, they do show that in the Netflix. It is kind of a love letter to New York. I mean, it's a very... they also are not showing the rats and the trash. But they are showing like the highlights of New York and the stuff that if you're a person who loves New York, it does celebrate what you could love so much about New York. And it very just like, oh, it's got this side and that side and all these people there. Just, it's just a nice thing that they do, that they have that.
Yeah.
Also because they end up in a lot of different places. So you get to see there's a lot to see in the city. I mean, it's not everything, it's not whatever, but so they have that. So anyways, Lily decides that there's so many people in this city, and for sure there's my perfect someone in this city. And she ends up leaving. We go forward and backward to see how everything happens, but she has this book, kind of like a notebook, and she's going to be her book of dares. And she puts it in the bookshelf at the Strand, which also, that's part of your love letter to New York, because you put the Strand, which is this iconic bookstore. And especially if you're anybody, whatever, the Strand, which is also, like, it's nice to do that. So she puts it there, and, Dash is the one who ends up finding it. It's like, basically, it's like a whole exchange. Like, okay, you got to do this, then you put the book back. Then the next person takes this, the next thing happens. They're basically corresponding through this. It's a little bit like Little Shop Around the Corner, which is kind of also like You Got Mail, kind of like P.S. She Loves Me, I think, is what the musical is called.
Just She Loves Me.
Oh, right. So one of those things where two people correspond with each other, they only end up bumping into each other. They bump into each other kind of once at a party. It's sort of like it, but it's not totally like that. Till at the end when they can unite and be all in love with each other. So
right. As every 17-year-old needs to do, find his or her true love.
That's the thing with young adult in general, a lot of people, especially when there's young adult romances, a lot of people get very excited because they're like, oh, when you're a teenager, that's usually when you experience first love, and it's such a beautiful, wonderful thing to have done or gone through, whatever it is. So that's why you end up with all these books that are like that. But at the same time, I guess as a kid, you might, if you're a 17-year-old or a teenager, you might appreciate them more. But when you're an adult, you're like, well, actually, that's not true. Some adults love it, and some adults, like myself, which I might be the only one in this category, are like, I don't want to hear your 300 pages about finding true love when you're 17 and the next page is like, we're going off to college, we're going to go our own way, but we had such a magical time together at the end. You know, it's like, so what did you just drag me through this? Which is why sometimes, it's like funny, sometimes in fantasies, when they're finding their true love thing, you almost expect them to end up together because it's not the modern world where not everyone's exactly getting married at 17. Like, fantasy didn't necessarily have it because they're not going to college afterwards, always.
Right.
So it's almost like, as much as they go on and on about their true loves and blah, 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 and you're like, okay, let's tone down the rhetoric here. At the same time, it doesn't feel like it's like, well, we all know you're going to break up tomorrow. It doesn't necessarily have that sometimes in the more made-up worlds than it doesn't like the real world.
Interesting.
Yeah, that's just a theory I just threw out there and all that.
I like it. I don't have as much of a problem with the romance. I don't have the same reaction to it as you do, or a strong reaction, I should say. But I do have a similar reaction. Maybe we're just like too old for these things, and maybe they're meant for teenagers. Because when you're a teenager and you're falling in love for the first time, it does feel like this is true love, and this is going to be my whole life, and it's perfect and it's everything. And then you get to be an adult and you actually figure it out, unless you marry your high school sweetheart, I guess. And you're like, oh, okay, it was first love, and you learned something about yourself, and you learned how to be empathetic towards another person, and there's a lot of good, fun things that can happen, but it's really not, it's not true love. It's not the end of the world if you don't find a boyfriend at 17, if you're not kissed by the time you're 16, it's like, it's an aspect, and for some teenagers, maybe it's more important for their development. Maybe they need like that empathetic learning how to take care of another person or something, and, to feel validated or whatever. And then
that's what friends are for, but in a healthy way.
That's true. So anyway, let's talk about our pearl clutching ratings real quick here. We have a 0 for violence. So there was nothing in here. He steals a Santa hat, but there's no violence. Language is a 3. It was actually pretty good in terms of a Netflix special and a teen thing. They didn't get a 4, which when was the last time we did a teen thing that didn't get all the way to a 4?
Yeah, right.
They didn't slip in even one use. Someone's shirt has the F word blocked out, but it's a quote from Die Hard on his shirt, so it's a little bit different. And anyway, it's blocked out. But it's not like he just has a shirt that says F the police or something, it's the yippee-ki-yay mother thing. So that's a little bit different. And then they use a couple of other words, but not really to excess. And then romance is a 3, not just because the whole thing is a romance. I think it's really the brother's fault that it's a 3.
Yeah, blame the brother. Absolutely. It is.
Dash and Lily kiss, and they both kiss other people, but it's not even like really bad make-out scenes, long, like passionate kissing. They're like pretty reasonably length kisses for teenagers. But the brother, like the first 3 times we see him, she walks into his room, which by the way, you probably shouldn't walk into anyone's room if it without knocking, but she keeps on walking into his room and he's naked under the covers with another guy.
Yeah.
Right? It happens multiple times, so we know what that's about. So
I didn't get that. Like, are you trying to just is the brother supposed to be a player or something like that, and then he's trying to make Lily like more like him? Like, you have to be bold and go out yourself and what? And like be like you that you're always with somebody else. He also, I don't know. They added in the brother, which, well, I should say they added. You have the brother, okay, and he's the gay character, and we see him also going through his whole love stuff. But like, why is he never given something besides for that? It seems so narrow to just be like, well, he's gay, so that's the only thing he ever has to talk about. That's very 2D. I don't know. It seems like they're not fleshing out a character when they just do that. Like, okay, well, that's all there is to say about him. Like, okay, then am I supposed to like him, not like him? Like, what do you want from me now?
Yeah. No, you're right. We learned at the end that he like dropped out of NYU, but we don't see him, whatever he was doing it, you know, practicing it, you know, his music or whatever, which just, that's all he talks about is being in a relationship. And he's supposed to be giving Lily advice, but also okay. So he starts texting this guy that he meets online, and they, like, in the first episode, we see him, he's like, oh, I just met this guy and he's coming over. Fine. A few days later, they break up because the boyfriend is going to be visiting his mom or his grandmother in Puerto Rico for 10 days. And the brother's like, I can't do long distance, which is like the stupidest thing ever. Right, it's like, you're not doing long distance when it's 10 days, but also he's devastated by this breakup, which, by the way, if you're dating the whole thing takes place in, I think, 2 weeks, possibly less, because it ends at New Year's and it starts a little bit before Christmas. Yeah. So the whole thing takes place in 2 weeks. So we see him, let's say it's December 17th. I don't remember the exact date. Like 5 days later, he's breaking up. That's not a relationship. That's you went on a couple of dates. And actually, in their case, I don't think they went on dates. They just slept with each other, which we talk about sometimes whether or not, you know, there's too many gay people depicted in some of these younger, you know, books and TV shows for younger audiences. But I would be offended if I were part of that community to have a character that's gay, where their only thing is being gay. Like, we don't know anything else about him. We don't know, what does he like to do in his spare time? Does he ever wear clothing? All we know is that
does he ever wear clothing?
All I know is that he has sex, but it's just not a relationship. Like, just having sex with someone you met online is not a relationship. And the fact that he's, like, broken up about this breakup, which is not a breakup because he's going to be long distance, which is not long distance because it's vacation. Like, they made him into such a joke.
Well, it's also, it's not just him. Why is it always the player who's supposed to be the relationship advice expert? Like, you know, that's like everything.
Yeah.
Every chick, like, oh, because you've been in so many relationships, you know. No, you've been in so many relationships, you don't know how to make a relationship last. Why are they the relationship expert? The relationship expert should be the person who's been married for 10, 20, 30 years, who said, oh, we had a rough patch, and this is how we got through it. Oh, we stuck with each other, you know, even when it wasn't always so perfect. Like, why, maybe because it's, like, less colorful, I guess, but it's like, why is the player, and also, if we knew someone who was a player, like, we would not let our friends date them if we're actually good friends.
No.
We'd be like, no, like, I know the guy's all suave, or I know he seems whatever, and he's got a nice car, but trust me, he's gonna use you and dump you. Right? If you really cared about someone, you would not let them anywhere near them. And you're definitely not going to him for relationship advice. Maybe clothing advice, maybe, but not relationship advice.
Right. Yeah, the whole thing with the brother is concerning, and I would say that the series, I guess miniseries overall, okay, it's a romance, but it's kind of cute, right? Like, they meet through this book, so it's a little bit different, but there's a lot of really questionable things, and I don't know how much of that is Netflix or the book, but since we're talking about Netflix, we have to talk about that, like, that's what we're talking about, and there's a lot of things in it, like, she goes out on Christmas Day, so Lily is what'd you call her, adorkable?
Yeah.
Right? Like, that's her thing. She makes her own clothes, and she's kind of petite looking, you know, and she's into sort of quirky things. She's cutesy. Yeah. She's like, that's her thing. She's Zooey Deschanel. Everyone always used to say Zooey Deschanel is a quirky girl. She's just like quirky. She's cute. And she's 17. Like, she's allowed to be quirky and cute. But then one of the dares that Dash gives her is to go to this Jewish punk, like, underground show.
Oh, yeah.
Which I had to say, I never thought I would listen to Jewish punk music, but I was kind of impressed. And I do wonder if they're a real band. That would be really interesting. But that's beside the point. So she goes to this club, which, by the way, like, what is a 17-year-old doing in a club? Right? Like, we know she's 17. She establishes the fact she might even be 16, but she's definitely not 18. Like, she's definitely not legal age. But she goes to this club. She's led in by a drag queen, which is completely inexplicable, by the way. Like, there's this one drag queen, and there are two drag queens there, but it's not like a drag show, so it's not really clear why specifically. Not that they can't be there, but like all dressed to the nines to go to a punk rock show. It's kind of weird. So she goes and like she ends up, letting herself loose a little bit, and she has fun. But first of all, what is she doing in a club? Also, walking around New York late at night by yourself. Now, I know New York, it has all these wonderful things, but there are very few cities that as a 17-year-old girl, I would walk around by myself late at night. So that, and also in a place, she's not just walking around her block. And then, oh goodness, there was one other thing I was going to say about the fact that she goes to this. Oh, why does she have to be bold? He's like, you have to break out of your shell. Now, yes, she's very shy and most of her friends are adults, but it sort of reminds me of our Greece talk we had a few weeks ago. She's not a bad person. She has hobbies. She's creative. She seems to be very, very close with her family. I don't understand why she has to change. If anyone has to change, it feels like he should change. Though, because he's this cynical kid at 17, but his parents divorced. And why is she not good enough?
He's standing around in his dad's like apartment in his like boxers and like a silk robe, like swirling whiskey and like doing like.
Yeah.
And his dad, like, they don't know that he's there by himself also because he took over his dad's apartment because his dad's, I guess, never home and always has... Yeah, it's... I don't know. I have no answers.
There is also a lot of drinking. And, there are always parties, right, where kids drink. But the times that kids drink in this show, it's weird because... So one time is at this Christmas party. Now, I guess technically they could be drinking apple cider, but I don't think they're supposed to be drinking apple cider. But it's not like one of those, oh, my parents are going to be gone, so like come over and we'll have a party. They're drinking from red Solo cups and they're hiding it. Like they're drinking from these fancy glasses. So it looks like they're drinking wine or champagne. But teenagers should not drink. Period, end of story. But there's a difference in a TV show or movie when they show that it's a party and clearly the teenagers are doing something they're not supposed to do, like they're lying and sneaking around. Whereas this didn't feel like they were lying and sneaking around. This is everyone's well dressed. They're in the apartment. It
treats them like adults. Like it treats the teenagers like adults, but in a way, not like, oh, you're mature to handle this topic kind of way. Like in a different, like, oh, you're doing things now that are adult things to be doing, but you guys are teenagers.
Right. So in that way that like New Yorkers sometimes are a little bit more like sophisticated, except they're still teenagers and there's still laws and it's still not healthy. And then she goes to this bar on Christmas Day because she's upset and all of her adult friends are there and she's in a tizzy. So she grabs someone's drink and the one adult says, hey, you're not old enough for that. And then this other woman pushes a drink at her and says, oh, or just gives like it's no big deal. She needs it. I was like, no, she doesn't need it. She's 17. Or maybe she does need it, but it doesn't matter because she can't have it. And then she goes home drunk and she's hanging out with adults. Right? And even though the one adult put up the first protest, apparently they all then go along with this girl drinking. And by the way, she's at a bar and goes to get drinks. So is the bartender not checking licenses? And then this other guy comes in that she like sort of went on a date with. And he's also ordering from the bar, but he's also 17. So there was just a lot of, her parents get mad when she comes home drunk. So her parents are mad, her grandfather's mad, but society at large does not seem to care about the fact that this young girl is drinking.
And that's the commentary of our times. And there's also one thing you want to mention about the kid from her past, sort of. This Edgar guy.
Yeah.
Because when she has this whole thing of how she was so traumatized and she was like 11 years old, right? Because she was handing out like friendship bracelets and he threw it down or something. Like, oh, it says, thank you so much. This is so ugly. And they're all making fun of her. Apparently she was like traumatized for the rest of her life from that. So that's why she makes her own clothes and has no friends who are kids or something. Because one thing happened one time when she was 11. Where I don't think it shows a lot of it doesn't show a lot of scenes like that. It's just that one scene with the one bully kid.
Yes. Pretty much.
Yeah. And then she finally sees him as an adult. Well, not as an adult. He's a teenager. But according to this, they're all adults. And he's like a nice guy. Right? He's just regular. Like, yeah, she tries to call him out for it. Like, oh, I was only 11, 12 years old. And he's like, well, so was I. And you're like, finally someone said it. Fine, thank you.
I was so worried in that moment because she goes to this slam poetry thing where he says he's going to be, and she gets up there and she starts talking, and she doesn't see him at first. And then she sees him and she starts calling him out, saying, you know, you were my bully and you're the reason that I don't have any friends. And I was like, this is going to be, like, that's so, first of all, it's just depressing. But also, you're right, we don't get an indication that he was her bully. We got an indication that one time he said this one mean thing, when, by the way, all these friendship bracelets that she was handing out, every other kid also ditched theirs. She just happened to overhear him say she was weird, but all the other kids apparently thought it too, because none of them kept these friendship bracelets that she worked so hard on. So she just, like, she puts it on this one guy.
But I've seen teenagers making friendship bracelets. So, like, it also doesn't make sense. How come none of the 11th graders the 11-year-olds want a friendship bracelet? That's also not explained. Like,
no.
Yeah.
And it's not explained why she doesn't already have friends. Like, clearly something happened before that if she's already kind of like this weird on the edge girl, but whatever.
It's in New York. She'd go to a different school.
So she calls him out, and I was like, this is just going to be another one of those, like, anti-bullying things. I mean, we should all be against bullying, but I don't like it when they let kids let their bullies define them. And that's what she did, right? And then, so she says, you did all this to me and my life is terrible now, and I was only 12 when that happened. And he stands up and he says, I was only 12 too, like you said. And I was like, oh my gosh, yes, because I hate it when characters don't stand up for themselves. And I hate it when they don't answer back to accusations in TV shows and they just let things stand. And that happens so much. Or when characters say things that you're like, if this were real life, that's what I would say. So why is this character not saying that? But he said it. And I mean, he's still kind of like a weird guy and he's not right for her. He's a little bit like too, like, trying to be cool, you know, and she's walks to the beat of her own drum. But that moment made me really happy because I didn't expect that they would actually do that.
Yeah. By the way, the slam poetry thing, that would be a good, like, oh, you have to break out of shell, you have to be bold, go do slam poetry and go speak in front of an audience.
Right.
This makes sense. This is a connection.
Yes.
Not like go get drunk and who knows what kind of drugs are being passed around at a punk concert or whatever.
Yeah, for sure. I think it could have been a nice story. You know, they're bonding over their love of books. I especially like the references to J.D. Salinger and Franny and Zoe, because my 12th grade English teacher was obsessed with Franny and Zoe. I mean, we analyzed that book down to the blue kimono and why was it a blue kimono and why was it a kimono and not a robe. I mean, we spent weeks on that book. So it was good to know that other high schoolers have to deal with it too. So, but it could have been a Christmas, you know, so there's Christmas movies and TV shows just have this like lighthearted, magical happiness about them. So it could have been that, but they really did these things that were really problematic when it comes to teenagers, you know, and again, the brother not giving him any more to him than the fact that he has sex with other men. And it's a little bit disappointing.
And on that happy note.
Well, all I'm saying is if you really are in the mood for something Christmassy, then Home Alone is a classic. You know, sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Is terrible. I mean, if you really, maybe we'd have to dissect that one day. Because Home Alone's got a lot of stuff, there's a lot of questionable stuff in Home Alone.
That's true. All right. It's a Wonderful Life. Can't go wrong with It's a Wonderful Life. There we go.
I think that was a pretty safe bet.
We figured it out for you people. All right. Well, thank you so much for listening, and we will catch you next time.
Cheers, peoples.
We hope you enjoyed this week's episode of Oh My Word podcast. Make sure you're subscribed so you always get the latest episode, and please leave us a rating and a review. And please share the show with your friends. Also, follow us on Instagram at Oh My Word podcast. There we post episode updates, our ratings for each book, and also our personal reading recommendations. Music for the show is by Tim Burke, Editor is Emily Yaffe. We'll see you next week.